I'm at Christie's to see something very, very special. A painting by one of the most celebrated figures in Western art whose work hardly ever comes to market. It's a painting that's been owned by dukes, archdukes and Holy Roman emperors, and that's been stolen not just once, but twice in its history. It is Titian's extraordinary Rest on the Flight into Egypt, and Letizia Treves, Christie's global head of research in Old Master Pictures, is going to tell me all about it. Letizia, what a pleasure to be in front of this absolutely extraordinary painting. I mean, Titian is such a talismanic name in the history of Western art, but can you tell us who was Titian and why is he so significant?
So Titian's simply the most celebrated artist of the Venetian Renaissance. He was the first to gain international fame in his own lifetime. And by the time Titian died, he was considered one of the greatest painters that ever lived. And I think that still stands today. This picture sits very early in his career, so in his late teens or barely 20 years old when he paints this.
I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it, how kind of sophisticated it feels for a young man's work.
Exactly, and it's around the time that he and Giorgione are employed on the same project, painting the facade of the Fondaco dei Tedeschi. And it's really the thing that launches Titian's career. He sort of outshines Giorgione in that moment and then becomes this very sought-after painter.
Can you tell us a little bit about the subject matter itself, what the story actually is?
So the Rest on the Flight is an episode in the early life of Christ when Joseph has a dream, and in that dream he sees that King Herod is going to kill the baby Jesus. So he takes Mary and the Christ child on a journey to Egypt for their safety. The figures, you know, are sitting in this very lush, verdant landscape. I mean, it's a far cry from Egypt.
Not very Egyptian, is it?
Exactly. But what Titian does by doing that is he brings this episode into his time and into his world and into our world.
Even with religious subject matter, he was able to find this humanity, this naturalism, this kind of relaxed quality.
He does it so brilliantly. I mean, it is the Virgin and Child and Joseph, but really it's the tender embrace of a mother and child. The way the child, it looks like he's tugging at her hair. You know, it's a gesture that every mother has experienced.
Exactly, it still happens today, doesn't it? Let's talk a little bit about the broader context. This is a painting that's painted in the beginning of the 16th century in Venice. What kind of a place was Venice in the early 16th century?
Venice was a hugely cosmopolitan city. It was the centre of trade for dyes, textiles, for the glass-making industry, and as a result that had a real impact on the colours and pigments that artists, you know, could get their hands on there. And Titian is one of the greatest colourists and uses these very rich, vibrant palettes.
Yes, he's often known as the Prince of Colourists, isn't he? And was really taking advantage of those extraordinary raw materials that were available in Venice at the time.
He combines this red and the blue of her drapery and contrasts that with Joseph, who's wearing the sort of complementary colours of yellow and purple. So your eye is led round the picture by his use of colour, by his use of light. I always love looking at whites in Titian because it shows how assured he is in applying the paint. So for example, just look at that little wisp of translucent, the veil on her head, and how that contrasts with this much weightier cloth on her lap.
He's a painter's painter, isn't he?
He's
He really is.
absolutely a painter's painter. So much so that in the 18th century, Sir Joshua Reynolds is said to have taken a picture by Titian that he owned and scraped it back layer by layer to try and unveil its secrets.
Can we talk a little bit about its provenance? Obviously, remarkable painting made more than 500 years ago, but it also has a remarkable, if you like, afterlife. What's the first record we have of this painting after it's made?
So we don't know who commissioned it, but it is in Venice in the early 17th century, and it's in a collection of Bartolomeo della Nave, who was a spice merchant who put together this incredible collection at the beginning of the 17th century with numerous masterpieces by all the leading artists in Venice in the 16th century, so great Bellini's, Giorgione's, Titian's. He had 15 Titians.
15 Titians.
And we know that this picture was part of that collection. And when Della Nave died, that collection was sold in large part en bloc to Basil Fielding, who was King Charles I's ambassador in Venice. And Fielding negotiated the collection on behalf of his brother-in-law, James Hamilton.
So it comes to England in the 17th century. What happens to it after that?
When Hamilton is executed by Parliament in 1649, his brother quickly ships this collection to the Dutch city of Middelburg, really for safekeeping, but it's also so he can show it to prospective buyers. And very quickly, the group is snapped up by the Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, who was the governor of the Spanish Netherlands, and the picture is in his esteemed collection and is shown in this incredible Kunstkammer picture by David Teniers. And we can see this picture hanging by the doorway, so it remains in the imperial collections throughout the 17th and 18th century.
And then obviously another fascinating aspect of the story is in the early 19th century it gets looted by Napoleonic troops, is that correct?
That's correct. So it's taken by his troops to Paris, destined for the Musée Napoléon, but is returned in 1815. So the picture goes back to Vienna. But in the course of the 19th century, it makes its way back to this country and is owned by a Scottish connoisseur who sells the picture here at Christie's in 1878. It was bought by the 4th Marquess of Bath, and the picture has remained in the family ever since, hanging at Longleat, a house in Wiltshire.
And yet there was another twist in the tale, because in 1995 this painting was stolen from Longleat and it was missing for 7 years, and then after a £100,000 reward it was discovered in a plastic bag in a bus stop in Richmond in southwest London and is now recovered to its rightly home. So it's an extraordinary story, isn't it, this painting?
It is, and it's a picture that has this remarkable history from the 16th century in Venice to the modern day, and it's a unique chance for someone to be part of that picture's history. But I'm always reminded when I stand in front of it of just what a ravishing, beautiful picture it is.
That's the thing, it's easy to be overwhelmed by the names and the celebrity, but actually the picture itself is just a jewel box, isn't it? It's just an absolute delight.